Welcome everybody, welcome to the second part of chapter 19, the Enlightenment Institute, where we go over the proof and evidence provided by other scholars and writers of the existence of the flying spaghetti monster. As said, part 2, this should really be the end of the story here, but let's go. Evidence of the baker. If we were to walk along the beach together holding hands and were to find at our feet a German chocolate cake, we would undoubtedly be surprised. Our shock at finding this seductive pastry results from the inborn knowledge that cake does not rise from the sands unbidden. A cake must have a baker. We understand that cakes do not simply appear randomly out of the void because of their form and complexity. If the frosting were removed or the butter replaced with tuna salad, what would we have before us would not be the delicious concoction that we call cake. It would be burnt, unfrosted tuna, and that would be disappointing. There had to be a baker for our cake. And further, since it is glistening, moist German chocolate cake, there must also be Germans. For we all also know that, like cake, chocolate is not naturally occurring. Chocolate must be created by Germans, people who have alchemic power over the raw substance of cacao, thus to make it into a divine element as we know as chocolate. The process of making chocolate is a mystical one, as any process to create such a delicious product must undoubtedly be. The creators of chocolate are almost as complex as the chocolate itself. And tracing this line of logic, we begin to comprehend that chocolate makers, Germans, must also have a baker. The majestic nature of chocolate clearly points to a mystical origin, and since the world is full of majesty, we suddenly understand that its baker must also be a source of great spiritual power as well. This world, which is infinitely more complex than cake, even if the cake is both German and chocolate, cannot occur out of chance. It must have a divine baker. There are levels of form and purpose that will not rise without the intervention of a baker, and the world is full of such mixed and layered forms. The most striking of these forms is that of a pirate. Nothing but the divine could have created such a glorious creature as the pirate, let alone a ship full of pirates. Pirates could only have been created by a divine baker who, with his wisdom, applied levels of logic and organization to the completed life of all existence. A pirate is made up of several distinct elements: his love for the sea, his fanciful attire, his endless search for booty, and his parrot. His love for the sea is complex, for, as he loves the lady of the sea, breaking her maidenhead with each thrust of his prow, he also scorns her, as she brings him storms and danger. A pirate has fanciful costume, sashes and golden rings that could not have emerged from the void, but have a form and function made specifically for the body of the pirate. His lustful search for booty borders on an obsession, an endless quest for the hidden island that rumors say contains a cursed treasure. It seems contradictory that a pirate would search for cursed treasure, but that in itself is evidence of the divine plan of our baker. Even the parrot that sits perched on the pirate's shoulder is masterfully formed, a creature able to mimic the pirate's own words, lending an ominous weight to their meaning. Such a bird could not have been created from a process by which elements available in a primordial stew of young earth experienced passing electrical currents that stimulated them to form a variety of molecules, including a self-replicating molecule, which over time produced varieties that competed with one another for resources, becoming even more complex through competition and mutation, some of which developed strategies involving cooperation for an advantage in the replication process, an advantage that produced an interactive whole that could have developed limbs for movements, light-sensitive cells that eventually became eyes, and bright colorful feathers that would be used to attract mates and thus continue the process of replication originated in those basic self-replicating molecules of the primordial stew. No, that explanation is far too complex to be accurate, and moreover, I don't understand it, so it must be wrong. What I do understand is cake. Cake, especially German chocolate cake, is scrumptious and was made by a baker. The story of science speculated at the creation of things there was a Big Bang. Could we not see this as a big baking? What of the baker, who at the beginning of time baked all things, completed the mixing and rolled out the world, giving it a warm center and a crispy crust? Who was this baker, this elementary divine who created the world? Our only explanation for this baker is the flying spaghetti monster, the creator that mystically baked the world into being. Holy men with the gift of sight were able to discern the teachings of the flying spaghetti monster. These holy men are good guys, not above lending a 10 spot or buying a guy a beer. To say that they are wrong, that what they preach is not complete fact. It is to say that they are evil liars, which I will not stand by and listen to you say about our holy man. Scientists claim that the creation of Earth was something involving math and chemicals. I find math and the physical sciences to be irritating, and those scientists, none of whom have ever lent me a 10 spot, are stuck-up jerks who are blind to the truth of the flying spaghetti monster. How many elephants had to die to make their ivory towers? Jerks. Evidence of a holy baker is in our world, in cake and in chocolate. Scientists tell us that the world was a stew, when I think it is clearly a layered cake. They have the stew idea, and I have a theory that stands by cake. Who but the divine who was actually there could say which one of us is right? Cakes are made by immortal bakers. Chocolate is divinely mixed by Germans, and pirates are inexplicably complex. All these factors lead us to the conclusion that our world was created by the flying spaghetti monster, who, in his wisdom, baked us all. Piracy as a Preventer of Tropical Cyclones, by Jacob D. Hack Mishra, Department of Meteorology, Pennsylvania State University; Michael B. Lawson, Department of Physics and Astronomy, University of Wyoming. Abstract. Recent hurricane seasons have been characterized by intense and frequent tropical cyclones. One contributor is the increased sea surface temperature, which is caused by decreased upwelling of cold deep ocean water. We demonstrate that decreased pirate activity results in less upwelling. This suggests that the only viable solution to intense tropical cyclones is to increase pirate activity. Introduction. The destructiveness of the 2004 and 2005 hurricane seasons has heightened public and scientific awareness of the possible long-term consequence of global warming. Although the link between hurricane strength and global warming remains speculative, recent work has shown that hurricanes have intensified over the past 30 years. With an increase in the number of Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes and a decrease in those classified as Categories 1 and 2. Emmanuel, 1987, argued that hurricane intensity is a function of the sea surface temperature, SST, which of course increases as the Earth warms. But other factors important as well. Lighthill, ETAL 1994, pointed out that while a lower SST limit of 26 degrees Celsius is required for tropical cyclone formation, several other key factors contribute to formation in intensity. The increase in global average temperature is well correlated with a decrease in global pirate populations, as is evident in Figure 1. Piracy and upwelling. Piracy decreases the average SST by inducing upwelling of cold deep ocean water. Various pirate activities contribute to upwelling. These include involuntary crew resignation, intervessel interactions, and acoustically transmitted oscillation. Involuntary crew resignation, ICR, also known as walking the plank, involves a pirate or captive being forcibly ejected a vessel at sea. This results in upwelling from the displacement of water by the ejectee. Intervessel interactions consist of transmissions of projectiles between vessels resulting in destruction or boarding. Upwelling is caused by scattered projectiles and by sinking of vessel elements. Acoustically transmitted oscillations also known as sea shanties. Where originally intended to boost morale of rowing pirates, they have assumed ritual functions with the ascent of external power supplies. ATOs produce upwelling by disturbing the sea surface. This increases motion over large biological entities, fish or whales, producing displacements. Model results. We have modeled pirate-induced upwelling using the pirate activity realization rate of oceanic tendencies. Oceanic circulation model. We have modeled pirate-induced upwelling using the Parrot oceanic circulation model. This model has 0.5 degree resolution and accurately reproduces present-day ocean currents. We simulated normalized pirate-induced upwelling in upwelling pirate units or UPU of the three upwelling categories described above. An ICR event produces one UPU. IVIs produce a variable number of UPUs. We used a Maxwellian with an average of 1000 UPU. It should be noted that IVI events can produce multiple ICRs. ATO produce continuous upwelling based on the local pirate density and oceanic biotic activity. The world average ATO is 0.5 UPU a day. We average pirate activity from 1605 to 2005 ocean grid cell, while recent pirate activity is weak and concentrated off the Somali coast. Historically, piracy has been concentrated in the Caribbean. This is consistent with our model results, which produce significant pirate-induced upwelling in the Atlantic basin. Discussion. We have demonstrated that pirate activity produces upwelling. It is thus obvious that a decreased pirate population will result in less oceanic upwelling, especially in the Atlantic basin. As evidenced by the 2004 and 2005 hurricane seasons, decreased upwelling results in increased SSTs and more intense tropical cyclones. Our Parrot model predicts that if the downward trend in piracy continues, tropical cyclones will intensify. The hurricane season may also lengthen due to increased SST. Predictions and experiment. The Parrot model has not been experimentally verified. Therefore, we have predicted the upwelling and global impact resulting from a single ICR event. While the effects of an ICR event depend on the mass of the ejectee, our model predicts a reduction of roughly 10% in the number of named tropical storms in the Atlantic basin. In the 2006 season, as a result of a relatively small ICR event of the northern Puerto Rican coast between March 9 and March 13, 2006. We intend to experimentally verify Parrot by producing such an ICR event. At least one of the authors of this paper will be present for the experiment to measure the exact UPU value of the event. Conclusion. We have demonstrated that decreased piracy contributes to increased tropical cyclone intensity. The only viable solution is to increase pirate activity, especially in the Atlantic basin. We suggest that ICRs and ATO are preferably to IVIs, because they offer a finer control for upwelling effects. Acknowledgements. We thank the Flying Spaghetti Monster for inspiring this work and Robert Henderson for advocating piracy to fight global climate change. Life, Kolkomarov Complexity and Delicious Spaghetti by Nick Moran. To begin, let us look at the forms of life we can see on this planet. They all exhibit a certain degree of complexity that is not found in non-living matter. A dog is much more complex than a rock. To express this, we can use the concept of Kolkomarov complexity. Living things possess high Kolkomarov complexity because their DNA is decidedly uncompromisable. As an example, consider the string of bits 10101010. This string has very low Kolkomarov complexity because it can be compressed to write 10 4 times. On the other hand, the string 0100101 is uncompressible in the same sense that DNA is. It has very high Kolkomarov complexity. That string was generated by me tapping O and 1 keys on my keyboard. If I had a keyboard with only ACGT, I could similarly write random DNA. If we put that DNA into a cell and try to make a living organism out of it, I very much doubt we would get anything living, much less good at living. Therefore, the incompressible complexity we observe in living things is non-random. It has been created for a purpose, the purpose of building living things. So if the DNA has been created, then there must be a creator. Some choose to posit a Christian God, others choose intelligent aliens with amazing technology. The problem is that both of these choices must also have extremely high Kolmogorov complexity. My chances of randomly hammering out the code to a divine being on my 4-key keyboard are even less than that of coming up with a living animal. There are really just restatements of the same problem. We still don't know where the complexity came from. We could posit an endless string of gods, each of whom created the one before it, thus accounting for the extremely high complexity of a god. However, this string just results in higher and higher degrees of complexity and gets us nowhere. What we need is a way to get high complexity from low complexity. If you'll indulge me a brief tangent, I would like to discuss the properties of spaghetti. Imagine a box of uncooked spaghetti. It is essentially a series of straight lines. A box of 200 pieces of spaghetti has very low Kolmogorov complexity. You could easily compress the data contained in those 200 pieces. Now I imagine a plate of cooked spaghetti, complete with sauce and, if you like, meatballs. Imagine the process of untangling this mass. It would take hours to teach each individual piece of spaghetti, clean of the sauce and put it in its own separate place and pick out the meatballs. This plate of spaghetti, all tangled up and covered with delicious sauce, has very high complexity. Spaghetti, the astounding property of being able to go from very low to very high complexity. Now let's return to our search for the creator. Clearly, God and super-intelligent aliens don't help us in our problem. A spaghetti god, however, could. It is reasonable that something of low complexity might come into existence on its own. We don't look at a rock in the woods and feel the need for a designer. So low uncooked spaghetti does not require a creator. It is quite capable of arising through modern, random, natural processes. Then, when cooked via the infusion of energy, it can come to have a high complexity. Consider the difference between uncooked and slightly cooked spaghetti. Slightly cooked spaghetti has slightly higher complexity than uncooked. There is a continuous spectrum from low to high as the spaghetti is cooked. The more spaghetti is cooked, the more energy has been infused, in order to create a flying spaghetti monster capable of creating life, which would have an extremely high level of complexity. We would need an extremely high amount of energy to do the cooking. There is only one place where we might find the required amount of energy: the universe, immediately following the Big Bang. Temperatures of 100 billion degrees Kelvin would certainly be sufficient to generate a high Kolmogorov complexity of spaghetti with the power to create life. Thus, we have found a solution to the question of where Kolmogorov complexity of life comes from. Uncooked spaghetti arose naturally, quite possibly because of its low Kolmogorov complexity. During the first instant of the universe, it was then cooked by the extremely high temperatures, causing it to rapidly gain a complexity to the point of being able to create life. Further increases in complexity granted the ability to fly and monstrous status. There will likely be some neo-Darwinian Ivy League scientist elite who will come up with some other object that can rise in complexity when cooked. In order to prove that the true form of the creator is that of a flying spaghetti monster, I will employ a version of the famed cosmological argument. 1. You don't need a reason to enjoy spaghetti. 2. Everything else has a cause. Nothing can cause itself. Everything is caused by another thing. A causal chain cannot be infinite in length. There must be a first cause. The first cause has no cause. Spaghetti is the only thing that can have no cause, thus must be the first cause. QED, bitches. A 21st century ontological argument by Kevin Heinrich. A classic argument for the existence of God is known as the ontological argument, henceforth OA. This argument was developed by Saint Anselm in the 11th century, but has been greatly improved upon in the ensuing years. The argument in a nutshell is that a perfect being must must necessarily exist. It is part of the very nature of a perfect being to be real. All beings that do not exist are by definition imperfect. This is because it is better to exist than to not exist. That is, to exist brings you closer to perfection. So if we can merely conceive of a perfect being, then it must, on pain of contradiction, be real. In a popular formulation of the OA, we are asked to imagine a being of which no greater can be conceived. One might motivate this process by creating a list of perfections. Reasonably, such a list would include omnipotence, omniscience, benevolence, and being the creator of all of reality, and so on. We are then asked to compare this list with one in which the characteristics of actual existence has been added. Obviously, the second list describes a more perfect being. It is clear then that the first list was not a description of a being which no greater can be conceived. No matter what characteristics we have imagined, actual existence would be an improvement. Hence, whatever characteristic we attribute to our perfect being, existence must be one of them. While there have been many criticisms of the OA, from Kantian metaphysics to modern quantified logic, we believe all such challenges can be answered. However, we do not have time to review the nuances of this debate. For more detailed information, please see a website which you can find if you buy the book. Traditionally, it has been argued, and to be frank, it has generally only been assumed, that the necessarily existent prefect being fits comfortably into the Judeo-Christian mold. Now, surely, any perfect being has the characteristics listed above. It is omnipotent, omniscient, benevolent, and the creator of all reality. Here we have no quarrel with tradition. However, we will soon see there are several other characteristics that have been overlooked or suppressed by philosophers and theologians during the last millennium. We propose that a careful review of the reasoning behind the OA will indicate that rather than the God of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the OA indicates the existence of a mass of starchy substance capable of gravity resistance. Such a being must necessarily be, and so all denials of its existence involve blatant logical contradiction. We will begin our argument with an experience most people can share. When a young person moves away from home and goes to college, he finds himself confronted for the first time with the task of providing himself with the necessities of life. For many college freshmen, this proves a nearly insurmountable task, which one can survive without paying the gas, electric and phone bills. All living things require sustenance in order to continue to live. And what is the staple diet of the improvised student? Ramen noodles, macaroni and cheese, and spaghetti. But it's not merely college students in first world nations that subsist on this food. The staple diet of a large portion of humans is starchy noodles. The unique properties of this foodstuff make it the most unpopular form of substance in all of recorded history. Noodles are high in caloric content. They are nutritious and they are simply and easy to produce. Clearly, then, noodles are an objectively superior food. Indeed, noodles are the perfect food. We will demonstrate that our perfect being must be made of the most perfect food. Before we continue, however, a potentially serious objection must be met. Some will argue that because rice is a staple diet of so many people in the world, it must be the more perfect food. On the contrary, we argue that rice is a profoundly evil form of sustenance. The corrupting nature of rice should be evident to anyone who has taken seriously the 20th century battles against the evils of communism. This small deceptive grain has provided the fuel for millions of communist soldiers, communist spies and communist infiltrators. What countries remain communist in the 21st century? China, Vietnam and Korea come to mind immediately. Now, what food is most commonly associated with these nations? Certainly not spaghetti. The case against rice should be immediately clear. As a side note, this result should be of more than casual philosophical interest. A central part of modern struggles against tyranny should involve changing the eating habits of those living oppressive regimes. Now, why must a perfect being be composed of the perfect food? The argument is surprisingly straightforward, since food is necessary for life, and life is more perfect than non-life. Food is a fundamental substance or substratum of all living things. All living things are made of food. The perfect being exists, and because it is a being rather than a non-being, such as a very small rock, it is necessarily alive. But what shall our most perfect being be made? The most perfect food, hence the perfect being, is made of some kind of pasta. Another perfection is gravity resistance. Modern science holds that gravity is a weak force. However, this is in clear contradiction to the evidence. Anyone who has ever climbed a flight of stairs, fallen from a great height, or hiked up a mountain can attest that gravity is a strong force indeed. The scientific elites tell us otherwise, but the contradictions in modern physics are evident to even the most casual observer. If gravity were a weak force, then surely the rotation of the Earth would cast us all into space. Does electromagnetism keep Mount Everest in place? Even a child can see the contradictions here. Only someone with an overabundance of education could deny the evidence of their senses in such an absurd way. Contrary to the modern physics, which is corrupted by naturalism, evolutionism and anti-pastaism, gravity is the strongest force in the universe. Surely, then, a perfect being is capable of resisting the strongest force in his creation. Hence, a perfect being is capable of gravity resistance, such as flight. We hope this essay enables the reader to see the rational necessity of belief in the flying spaghetti monster. The truths of the world are not difficult to find, and much effort and money could be saved if we were willing to accept the futility and error of so-called scientific reasoning and spend our time in careful contemplation of his noodly greatness. R. Note, the arguments which demonstrate that a perfect being would require mortals to dress as pirates are too obvious to merit inclusion in this essay. This deliberation is left for the reader. On the matter of spheres of meaty substance in a pasta matrix, remain agnostic. One must not extend one's reasoning beyond what is available in terms of first principles and evidence. Some room must be left for faith. Now we're getting another piece of mathematicals, and I'm going to skip that because it is going to be really tricky to read, and I don't think I can pronounce every equation that is in here. Moving on to the next. A corporate proof of the flying spaghetti monster. Scott Stoddard. My apologies. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary with my current employer. Actually, I completely forgot, but I did not. I received a very nice but god-awful useless sterling silver keychain with the company logo. It's nice to be appreciated. It also got me thinking. If everything on earth is God's handiwork, then he really is the worst kind of micromanager. I don't want to believe that. Let's assume that God exists. Can't prove it, can't disprove it. Doesn't hurt to think that there is an all-powerful deity with a corner office somewhere out there in the cosmos. Now, the universe is a pretty big place. It probably isn't a privately held company. I'd be willing to bet that the universe is incorporated years ago. In a business model, God would be the CEO. That would make God accountable to the board of directors of the universe inclusive. What makes up this board? What are their terms of office, and what, for that matter, would we, as residents of the Earth, be considered stockholders or employees of the corporation? Let's assume as employees. I know I've never received any dividends or letter of proxy. I think that everyone would agree that the Earth is a dangerous place. Humanity is continually trying to destroy itself. Throw in a bitchy Mother Nature with her tsunamis, earthquakes and hurricanes, and you have what any businessman would call a high-risk venture. So now that main question is this: would God, the CEO of Universe Inc., take a hands-on approach to the certain and management of the Earth? I think not. God, being the smart CEO we all know he is, would most likely have handed the project off to a vice president for strategic development of the Universe Inc. This would of course limit God's liability to the board of directors of the Universe Inc. In turn, the VP, not wanting to be immersed in corporate scandal should anything go wrong, probably had accounting form a shell corporation called the Earth Inc. and promoted some hotshot middle manager to oversee the whole thing. I believe that the flying spaghetti monster is the manager. The FSM, wanting to spread the wealth, brings over some of his buddies who might be great guys to go drinking with, but who really aren't suited for managing an entire planet. This would explain famine, disease, suffering and stupidity. Corporate cronyism at its worst. Don't you think this theory of intelligent design just fits together a little more soundly than God himself creating the Earth Inc.? If we make it to another millennium without folding, do we all get silver keychains? And now a final note from Bobby Henderson and his staff. Dear newly converted reader, I think it's safe to say that FSMism is not only a groundbreaking religion, but the only one supported by hard science. This makes it probably the most unquestionably true theory ever put forth in the history of humankind, and yet we find doubters and naysayers galore, mostly in the form of evolutionists, ID supporters and members of other religions. But we live in America, a country founded on, among other things, the idea of religious freedom. We have laws to protect people against religious persecution. In spite of these laws, you may encounter people who disagree with your right to miss school or work every Friday, to wear an eye patch in public, to talk like a pirate, etc. Your first step should always be to tell these skeptics a little about our beliefs. They may simply convert to FSMism, in which case your problem is solved. But sometimes it's not that easy. If, after all learning about our religion, people still refuse to allow you to express your constitutionally protected right of freedom of religion, then you should write a letter. If you're in a school, write a letter to the principal copying the superintendent of the school district as well as your local chapter of ACLU. If you're at work, write to your supervisor copying the company's director of humane resources and again forward the copy to the ACLU. The important thing is not to sit back and let your rights be trampled on. To those hardened evolutionists, we would remind you that we are not saying evolution couldn't have happened, that it's only that it's most likely a process guided by his nuclear appendage. We know that the FSM may be working behind the scenes to make evolution look plausible. We also know that he might not be doing so. The flying spaghetti monster works in mysterious ways, and he definitely messes with such stuff all of the time, though we know not why. To the proponents of intelligent design, we offer you this olive branch. Pastafarians support your argument that only teaching evolution in schools unfairly discriminates against those with creation beliefs. We know about your efforts to develop a wedge strategy, whereby you seek to keep the Bible out of the discussion for now, instead concentrating on establishing scientific evidence of a creator. Pastafarians see the wisdom of this approach, and we offer our own fork strategy, in which we argue for the inclusion of supranational explanations in science, thus opening the door for FSMism to be taught one day. Quite simply, we are brothers in this effort. Anyone knows that theories aren't the same as facts, and there is little doubt that alternate theories